Hello everyone. Today we start our session number 6 of the UPSC CSE, the ethics paper. It's going to be an interesting session as we would be focusing on socialization. Maybe we'll be able to cover ideology. I'm not too sure about it. And we would like to complete what was left of opinions from our previous session. Okay? You may realize that most of the thoughts in your mind, for most of us, are actually not even ours. What we think is thinking is actually not thinking. What we believe are the right criterias to evaluate the world. One, they do not belong to us. Secondly, we've never given it a thought. Why do we consider some things more valuable and some things as bad or evil? While we go around judging the world, making a lot of moral judgments, you can also call it moral distinctions or moral conclusions. But the criteria that we use, the rules that we use, the values that we attach to those, to the output of that rules, we have never given it a thought. All right. So let's begin. As I start with socialization, I would like to give you a couple of examples. For example, the US slave trade, the English Act of 1801, which was also called the Journal Enclosure Act of 1801. Okay. And what is the difference between slogans and rhetoric? Okay. Let's kind of start here for the next 2 minutes. We all say Bharat Mata Ki Jai. It is not only a hope, but it is also our firm belief when we say Bharat Mata Ki Jai. It is something like saying, translated in English is glory to our nation. Wonderful. But what after that? Glory to our nation. So two questions. What after that? How do you ensure glory to your nation? And even a more fundamental question. What do you mean by when you say Bharat Mata Ki Jai? We're just getting started. I want you to start thinking about this. What do you mean by it? How do we achieve that? Okay, are there any guidelines, or it is just a grand slogan which could actually qualify as a rhetoric? Okay, then comes even the next level of complexity. I could say Bharat Mata Ki Jai in 3 or more completely different ways. I could speak it in a very angry, vengeful, and a manner that excludes certain communities. That is one. Second, I could speak it in a very loving, affectionate, and with a perspective to include everybody, inclusion. Okay. A soldier could have this as a war cry in battle. Bharat Mata Ki Jai, and then we do it. We could speak it in some other ways also. But what do we mean by this? What does it stand for? You know, interestingly, I asked about this to a lot of people. I never got a satisfactory answer. Glory to our nation. How do you ensure that? Or is it just the sentence and full stop? Listen to a couple of sentences now. When I say, try and identify these sentences as belonging to a certain literature. Try and identify this. I'll try and give you these sentences. To abide by our constitution, its ideals and institutions, the national anthem and the national flag. Sentence 1. Second, to cherish and uphold the noble ideals that inspired our national struggle for freedom. Sentence number 3. To uphold and protect the sovereignty, unity, and integrity of our nation. Sentence number 4. To defend our nation and to render national service when called upon to do so. 5. To promote harmony and the spirit of common brotherhood among all people. 6. To value and preserve the rich heritage of our composite culture. 7. To protect and to improve the natural environment, including forests, lakes, rivers, and wildlife, and to have compassion for all living beings. Has any one of you been able to identify what am I speaking about? Okay, I'll just continue. Then we say to develop scientific temper, humanism, and the spirit of inquiry and reform. To safeguard public property and to abjure violence. Then, to strive for excellence in all spheres of individual and collective activity. And finally, to provide for education to his child or ward between the age of 6 to 14. Where do these sentences belong? These sentences, all right? Absolutely right. These are fundamental duties. When you say Bharat Mata Ki Jai, it's not a mere slogan. It's not a rhetoric. It tells you what is your duty. It reminds you of what it is. What is it that your duties towards the nation are? How do you achieve glory for your nation? All right? If we do not understand this deeply, then it's just a slogan. You can keep repeating it. And if I speak in a very vengeful manner, angry manner, and to exclude certain people and communities, it actually becomes a rhetoric. Rhetorics are grand statements which are actually meant to distract you, deceive you in some manner, to mask certain truths, to take you away from core issues. They are rhetorics. Okay? So they may appeal to a sense of loyalty and sacrifice, but at the end of it, if we do not understand what Bharat Mata Ki Jai means, then you are just parroting something that has been told to you. Okay? So that's an example of understanding things. That is why I said many of the things that we hold dear in our hearts, dearest to ourselves, we may not even understand it. So I'd encourage you to go speak to people. Ask them what it means. All right, you'll discover it. All right, as I begin to explain what is socialization, before we even get to a definition of it, I want to give you example from a certain era of history. I'll take you back to history. International context. Okay, we'll travel to England between 1750 to 1850 or 1870. All right, it'll help you brush up a little bit of your geography, history, even a bit of politics, but we will derive great lessons from it as to what socialization is, and then we will arrive at the definition of socialization. Okay, so let me attempt to draw for you the map of England. Okay, I'll try and do my best. I hope we get something that is a little more meaningful. Okay, this should be approximately the map of England, and all of you know what the neighboring nation to it is. So let's kind of get that. Okay, now I'm going to take you back into history from 1750 to about 1870. At the beginning of this era, there were two things happening. One was the revolution in agriculture, scientific revolution in agriculture, and the second was the industrial revolution. Okay, so there were two very powerful economic forces which were at work in England at that point of time. Okay, just as we go forward, I'll tell you which were those important industrial cities in England at that point of time. So important areas that were for industrialization were something like, maybe I should, rather than confusing it, okay, this will teach us one of the biggest lessons in what socialization is all about. So this is approximately those big industrial areas. Okay, a place called Manchester, Birmingham, Sheffield, Leeds, Liverpool, Newcastle, Edinburgh, somewhere here, Glasgow, Cardiff, Bristol, and a port called Plymouth, Dublin, Belfast. Okay, this was Glasgow. So what was happening was, The Industrial Revolution, when it began, factories started getting set up. Factories needed tens of thousands of workers, but people were not willing to work for those factories. One. Secondly, as the agriculture revolution was happening, in order to adopt those new scientific methods, those equipments, those machines, the landowners, the wealthy landowners wanted more and more land. Okay? In that era, and in fact before that era, for centuries and centuries of history, all the area except for certain areas that clearly belonged to wealthy landowners, most of this area was free for everyone. This area used to be called as commons. It was common for everybody, therefore it was called as commons. So ordinary people, village people, they could walk into those commons, collect firewood, do fishing, collect fruits, nuts, berries, grow a little bit of their own agriculture, okay, do hunting and get animal skin, meat, etc. If they had some livestock, okay, like cows and everything, so their cows could graze on those green lands. But when the agriculture revolution started, the wealthy landowners wanted to expand the land holdings that they had. So what, for example, if this was a land holding that some wealthy owner had, they wanted it to expand more and more. When they wanted to expand more and more, they went to and this is London. Okay. They went to the British Parliament and got individual acts, individual enclosure acts passed by the British Parliament. So those were the wealthy landowners. What do we mean by enclosure is you put barbed wire, kaate ki tar, and you keep enclosing more and more land. So what you're doing is you're making this land inaccessible to the ordinary people. Okay. Now those ordinary people could not walk and gather firewood, meat, grow their own stuff, collect fruits, nuts, berries, etc. Okay. They were completely cut off from this. That was one. And this was all because the wealthy landowners could now start using equipment that costed a lot of money and to achieve economy of scale. All right. So they started getting a lot of individual enclosure acts passed by the British Parliament. So the period from 1750 to about 1800 was when 5,000 individual enclosure acts were passed by the Parliament. Just imagine for a minute. Did British Parliament have no other work to do? 5,000 individual acts passed in this era. Okay. By 1801, the wealthy landowners and the British Parliament, they arrived at a conclusion. Why do individual acts? Why not pass a Journal Enclosure Act which legitimizes, which made it legal for wealthy landowners to throw off the people from those common areas and enclose the entire land. So the wealthy owners used force to displace people, throw off those people who were dependent on that land, cut off their access to it. So that was what British Parliament did. Journal Enclosure Act of 1801. Now, when the people got cut off, their lifestyle, which was there for centuries, suddenly shifted. Now, if they wanted to have grass for their cows, they had to buy it. So for the first time, instead of barter, barter, exchange of goods, now they needed currency, money, because they had no other means of livelihood. They started migrating towards these industrial centers. Birmingham, Manchester, and so on. Sheffield, I told you, Sheffield. Utensils and cutlery was the specialty of Sheffield. This caused a whole lot of population to start moving north. So they started moving north towards these industrial centers. When they reached the industrial centers, the conditions were, you can't even describe the pathetic conditions of those places. The salaries were, the wages were barely enough to even survive. There was no housing available except that which was provided by the factory owner at very high prices that took away any little amount of money that these people could actually save. No drainage, pathetic salaries, 16 plus hours of work. I would suggest you guys should actually watch a documentary of the industrial era in England to realize what were the conditions prevailing, because these were more miserable than what I could ever describe to you. So, in order to keep those people away from rebellion, to keep those masses from becoming extremely angry, because even their children didn't have food, clothing, health, education was anyway out of the question. To keep them away from rebelling and burning down those factories or burning down the castles of the rich men who led the most lavish lifestyle you could ever imagine, and perhaps beat them up, burn their castles, etc., they deployed a very wonderful strategy. So before I come to that, let me give you something about this Enclosure Act. So they passed this act. You can imagine their parliament. I'm just going to write in short. Their parliament passed laws which favored the absolutely wealthy landowners, which made it illegal for other people to have access to that land, making it private property, and anybody who trespassed on that property with his or her animals or collecting firewood or collecting fruits, etc., would be prosecuted and they would be handed. It was actually made as stealing, and stealing was made as the ultimate illegal act under the law. So something that in the entire period of history was available to people suddenly became stealing from somebody's private estate. It became a crime. Now, to enforce, to get these laws, the courts started giving out the harshest punishments available under the laws. So if you were found stealing, trespassing on somebody's property, there were harshest sentences given out to people. Okay, and it didn't matter whether you were 8 years old or let's say 30 years old. Okay, because you were stealing. So courts started giving that kind of sentences. Then the kind of police that they had, their whole mission became protecting the private properties of these wealthy landowners. Okay, when people objected, the British Army was called to put a stop to that. People could not protest. Protesting itself was a crime under the law. So the army would come in, get those people, the leaders and a lot of followers of those movement, put them in jails, and that is the least I am describing, followed by months and years of brutal torture. The idea was to crush the spirit of common people. Nobody rebels. You can't even dare to complain. You can't raise your issues before any authority because parliament, courts, police, army, there was no legal recourse left. Even if people went to courts, the courts abruptly struck it down and said, nothing doing. Okay, army. Then they figured out that even this was not sufficient. Okay, so they thought they wanted to bring out some other weapons, tools. If you notice, these are all external measures. So I think you should actually note down as these were external measures for law and order, for ensuring compliance and conformity to the laws. I should write it down. External measures to ensure conformity, compliance with the laws. Okay, now comes another discussion, which is they said even external is not enough. So how about some internal INT? I'm just going to put it as INT, you write it in full. Internal measures. Could we evoke something in religion, fear of God, some social norms, some values by which these people could judge each other? Now here comes the Industrial Revolution. These people who got displaced, the common people who got, ordinary people who got displaced because of the fencing of the commons, started looking to these factories for their wages, for their survival, subsistence. Okay? Now, because the conditions were so pathetic, again the same things were passed. If you caused damage to somebody's property, here, if because of you a machine broke down, malfunctioned, your wages will be cut. If you turned up 2 minutes to 5 minutes late, your half a day's salary would be gone. If you did not turn up, you could be imprisoned. Children as young as 6 to 7-year-olds were working in these factories. Some of these factories, for example, the flour mills and a lot of other factories had very sharp machinery, blades working. So children were supposed to crawl in between and clear out whatever, for example, cotton away, cotton that got stuck in those blades. So many of those children lost their limbs, arms, hands, etc. When those people complained to the courts, exactly the same thing happened, dismissed. But when a rich factory owner complained against a group of workers, a woman, a child, a man, the severest sentence would be handed under the law. The police would come in, arrest, file the most serious cases against them. Army was called to crush the rebellions. So whether it was the agriculture revolution or the industrial revolution, everything was like that. Okay, internal measures. So these factory guys and all of them figured out how to keep these ordinary people away from doing any kind of rebellion. They did not even want them to complain. So they did a very wonderful strategy. So what they did is they used religion. They used education. They used something to, okay. They used literature. Kindly note it down. All of this created role models for ordinary people who were suffering the most pathetic, not only pathetic, but the most brutal conditions imaginable. Okay? And in fact, separately, when we speak about the philosopher called Karl Marx, he observed these conditions and then came out with his theories, etc. So we'll talk about it later when we reach the chapter of Karl Marx. Okay? Now, let me give you some examples. All right. Education, for example, there was no education available. The only education that workers and their children had an access was the Sunday church school. And there, literature was used as a weapon. So, for example, you can note it down. All things bright and beautiful. There is a poem, All Things Bright and Beautiful. I think it was 1848 by an lady called Cecil Frances Alexander. Search for her name and the poem. Cecil Frances Alexander. Okay, 1848. All Things Bright and Beautiful. It had a particular paragraph, and when I tell you that particular paragraph, you'll be quite surprised. In fact, the paragraph went like this, and this paragraph was later on removed. It had 7 original stanzas, okay, in that poem, one of which was very close to this. The rich man at his castle, Okay, so what we can do is, let's draw a castle. Visually, you'll remember it for a longer time. The rich man at his castle, the poor man at his gate. This is how the castles used to look like. Palaces, okay, fortified. And the poor man, something like with a begging bowl. The rich man at his castle, the poor man at his gate. God made them high and lowly. That sentence, I'll write it down. God made them high and lowly, and ordered their estate. Now look at this. Poems like this was taught to the workers and the children of workers during the Sunday schools. The religion, how it was used? There was something called Religious Tract Society, TRACT, tract. Tract means pamphlets on which something is written. The Religious Tract Society distributed millions and millions of these pamphlets in all these industrial towns. Whenever they heard that some town was in danger, some industrial town was in danger of rebellion, suddenly a whole lot of these religious people will land there and start distributing and start talking about all of this. They'll talk about religious values. I'll tell you what they were talking about. And then they used authors like Cecil Alexander, Francis Alexander, to write such poems and teach to the children. Now look at this. They said, God made them high. That means God had ordered the social status and the wealth of rich people. God made them either here or here. So if your condition was extreme poverty, unemployment, now you cannot access the commons. So they said, nobody else but God made them rich. God made them this. God is putting you through a divine test. God is testing your sacrifice, your loyalty, your faith. Divine test. Okay, God made them, so the status could not be challenged because God made it. And God ordered their estate. This estate doesn't mean property of poor people. It means the social status, their wealth, their aspirations, the resources. God ordered it. So how can you challenge what God ordered? These were writers like Cecil Francis Alexander. Then there were, I'll give you one more example. This is Charles Dickens, very famous. The Christmas Carol is one of the novels. So he highlighted in that novel two characters, a father and a son. The father's name was obviously fictional, was Bob Cratchit. Bob Cratchit, and his little boy was Tiny Tim. This is a very lowly, at a very small position, a clerk with a very rich man who was extremely exploitative of this person, did not give him wage, treated him with cruelty, brutality, nothing spared. And Bob's son, Tiny Tim, is very frail, very thin, not keeping good health, and also disabled. See the kind of literature. This was Charles Dickens, I think 1843 he wrote it. Okay? Bob Cratchit and Tiny Tim. And these were people who were shown as role models for the society. Role models for those very poor people in pathetic conditions. And what was it shown? That these people would always be so cheerful. The father and son would be so cheerful. Harsh winters, nothing to eat, no wages, no savings, the child with a disability, but very cheerful, extremely loyal. They just gave love to the rich man. They made all the sacrifices. They understood, they really understood his ways. They forgave him for everything that he did, maintained their optimism, hope, cheerfulness, never complained about anything, never even wished him bad in their hearts. They always blessed him. And after years and years, and one fine day, the rich man, his heart changed and he improved their condition. And hence it is proved that the poor people need to have all the patience in the world. They need to have their optimism, infinite kindness, understanding, love, affection, loyalty, okay, absolutely compliant, conforming to all the rules, taking all the brutality, all the exploitation, and still being so happy and contented and religious and therefore blessed. The moral of the story, what they were trying to create as role models was, poor people need to be like this and take all the brutality, everything, unkindness of the rich people, and one fine day the rich people will have a change of heart and will give them some charity. We are all talking of socialization. I can give you many authors, but I will not. Just in case some of you are interested, there was also an author called Thomas Carlyle, Carlyle, Carlyle. Okay, there was Edward Baines, Erasmus Darwin, related to Charles Darwin. But this is Charles Dickens. Okay, then there was somebody called Andrew Ure, Charles Knight. Endless literature which actually was something like this. So religion, they said the evangelical church, as well as what you call as reformist or the Calvinist church, that movements, they would take over these towns and be in charge of giving out some messages. So whatever I'm telling you is from pretty trusted sources. Okay. Education. Education, I told you, poems, literature. So now you see, can I call it the state, the government, the parliament, the land offices which kept records, the courts, the law and order, army as an institution, religion, education, literature, role models, even you can count as events. And I'm going to give you a very important line here. I hope you go back and think about it. It would be only right to say that the British royalty ruled over India. The British people did not rule over India because the British people were in such a situation. So when you say Britishers ruled over us, ruled over India, was it British people who ruled over India? Or was it the British crown, the British nobility, the British aristocracy, the British wealthy, either the landowners and all of this? Did this network rule over India? Yes. Or was it the common British citizen? Let me tell you a very shocking fact. In these factories, a typical British worker, whether British or from Ireland, their average age was around 16. Outside of factories, people who were there, hardly any opportunities. They could achieve 30, 32, 34. Wow. All right. Events were organized to tell these poorest, wretched workers that believe in nationalism, that the British is ruling over the world, and because they are putting their heart and soul, in the factories, therefore the British crown is ruling all over the world. Now just imagine, go back to our own history. When we said burn all those imported clothes and everything, can you connect it here? Miserable conditions here, miserable conditions there. The only people who was profiting was the state, the crown, the aristocracy, and the people who had the wealth. All right? Okay. So I'm going to take this off. So more or less, what you can do is, there is a similar anecdote, or similar, sorry, I won't call it an anecdote, I'll call it a part of history that you can similarly look at in the US slave trade. The second sentence, I'll leave it to you. Abraham Lincoln did not liberate, did not bring about the Emancipation Proclamation or freed the slaves because he wanted to free the slaves and he had a very kind heart. Or people around him genuinely believed in the evilness of slavery, so that freeing the slaves, abolition of slavery, or the Emancipation Proclamation was nowhere from change of heart, nobleness. It was all about political representation, taxes, etc. over the South. Maybe I'll mention it. I'll give you this story in the next session. All right. All right. So now what you realize is what is socialization is something we can start putting it down. We've considered a whole lot of these factors. Now we'll quickly look at socialization, arrive at a definition. Okay. First, I'll give you some factors of socialization, as has clearly come out from there. Socialization is something that starts with family. If you recall, in session number 3 or 4, I had talked to you about tale of two mothers. Two mothers with a mindset on two different extremes. Okay, one was the conservative mindset and one was a very forward-looking, exploring, discover, make your own choices. And this mindset was be suspicious of the world. They are not like us. Be skeptical of all new things, all different things. Okay, go back. You can watch the video of that session. So, family. So this factor is also called primary socialization. Okay. Then you have friends. And when you start in universities, colleges, workplaces, we call them peers, your colleagues. Family, friends, peers. Okay, then what other things? We've already discussed in that example about, let me put it down a little differently so that you can easily remember this now. Family, friends, peers, your colleagues. Okay. Now comes, can you easily remember real Rome's just as a memory trick, as mnemonics? Okay. Real Rome's. So I'm just going to write something similar to that. Religion, we've already seen. Education, the art of an era. Literature, this L is literature. In that example, there was another L, the legal system, the way they were making laws. Legislature, as well as the entire mechanism for enforcing those laws, implementation and enforcing of those laws. So just a memory trick to recall it easily. Literature, legal system. Okay. Then is a separate word. Role model. ROM, role model. Role model, I gave you example of Charles Dickens, Bob Cratchit, and Tiny Tim. They were the role models in that society. So it creates role models. Now, media, you can also say media and entertainment, the kind of jokes, the kind of movies that get made in a particular era. So you can look at the Nazi era, look at the kind of movies that get made. You may think of Hindutva as a political ideology and the kind of movies being promoted. Okay, all right. Media, entertainment. We can also have various events. I gave you example of that event in London and I think a couple of other places. Grand exhibitions were put where people could actually go and see how the British crown was dominating all over the world, and it was because of their wretched conditions. They didn't say wretched conditions, it is because of your loyalty, sacrifice, sweat, blood, death, ill health. You're actually creating this great nation. Okay, national pride, nationalism. Okay, events. You could also think of kind of sports events. Start looking at different things. IPL, etc., all of that. Okay, and finally, slogans. The kind of slogans. Right in the beginning, I gave you an example of slogans. Bharat Mata Ki Jai as a slogan. Okay. Within the sphere of Hindutva, you can say popular is Akhand Bharat, etc. Okay. So you got to figure out slogans, when slogans become rhetoric and when slogans actually have a very beautiful, inclusion, loving, affectionate, progressive feeling to them. All right. All right. So we come to then social, economic, and political institutions. Social institutions, economic institutions, political in. Here is where you derive political power, influence. Whether your community, you have access to that political power, influence. Are you even represented? Like in the British Parliament, were the common, ordinary people represented there? No. Political, because this is where you make laws. And in that example, we saw it was the economic, the industrial revolution and the agriculture revolution, the scientific revolution in agriculture was driving the politicians, the legislature to make such laws. And they had a vested interest. Remember that line? God made them high and lowly and ordered their estate. So there are some beneficiaries of the social system. Next time when we talk about US slave trade, I'll give you more examples. For those of you who are very curious, they had a rule in 1787 which was called the 3/5 clause or the 3/5 compromise. Just to spark your curiosity, by 3/5 they meant that one black man who was a slave man was not a whole person, was a 3/5 person. and then the way they justified, again through literature and religion and all of this, etc., role models. All right. Okay. These institutions and these specific factors, they all create what we call as socialization. But what is socialization? Let's look at the definition now. I'm going to also write it in a little peculiar way. Socialization, and there is always attach it with one big I. Always remember these two things, club these things together in your mind. Socialization, internalization. So you can write internalization. I'll tell you what internalization means. Let us say somebody is trying to teach me some rules and principles and values, norms, a certain way of doing certain things, etc. And like the first mother is using force, coercion is force, emotions, emotional blackmail, punishments, positive and negative, as I discussed in that session. When they're using all such factors to make me fall in line, initially I might resist. Over a period of time, with extreme, let's say, emotional blackmail, punishments, positive and negative punishments, where they deny me of something or attach a ugly consequence to my behavior. Okay, we will all study this under attitude also, under a very specific theory of attitude called operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is one of the three learning theories of attitude. So details we'll get into that. Internalization means when they succeed in me absorbing all that they want me to absorb. When I adopt everything that they want and I adopt it and I assimilate it to such an extent that it becomes part of me. And now I start enforcing it. Now I start communicating it. Now I start persuading people with it. Like I was being persuaded. I was being forced. Now I become that warden, jail warden, who enforces exactly the same thing which was done to me. Now I do not need somebody's watchful eye to keep me in line, because I have internalized it. I have adopted, I have assimilated it. It has become an integral part of who I am. Now I am the person who's communicating, persuading, justifying it, enforcing it, and ensuring that other people also get it exactly like that. So one, I become like relaying. So if there is a tradition, first I adopt, internalize that tradition or that practice or the norm, and then I pass it on successfully. Internalization. So once somebody internalizes something, that person, it becomes integral part of who that person is. So when I say, who am I? that internalized thing is part of you. Okay? Alright, why did I write like this? It's a simple way for you to get it in your memory. And I'm just going to add something. I'm going to add one arrow like this and one arrow like this. Okay? I'm going to make a happy face, and this guy is pointing to himself. Okay? Socialization is a continuous. It's a continuous. It is a lifelong and interactive process. It's a continuous. It doesn't stop. Unless, of course, somebody is internalized and now become the relaying station, broadcasting station, enforcing person. It's a continuous, lifelong, interactive. That means it's not one-way interaction of society and me. It is also me and society. Okay? And then the society kind of fixes me up nicely. It is interactive. Okay? So I'll raise some, for example, objections in the beginning. I'll seek justifications, and they give me the justifications. All right. Continuous, lifelong, interactive process. I think you should write it down. Through which an individual internalizes his or her society's norms, values, beliefs, representations. I suggest one thing. Whenever you write this word norm, at least in the beginning, make a small bracket. Always write T/P/C. What does it mean? Norms, which are also rules and principles. You can call it rules, principles, code of conduct. You can also call it traditions, practices, customs, cultural conventions, or standards of your society. All right, I'll explain this. Norms. So, continuous lifelong interactive process through which an individual internalizes his or her society's these four things. Now, I have already explained this, I think, in my previous lecture. So you can refer to my previous lecture, maybe the last video, where I have told you what does representation mean, belief we are yet to cover fully, values, okay, norms. Norms, let me tell you very briefly. Do you have a scale? Let's say there is a scale. Rules, ruler, okay? The ruler you use to measure length of something. Let's say there is a rule which says you have to come at 9 a.m. You have to report at 9 a.m. every day to, let's say, an office, maybe a social institution, economic or a political, whatever, some institution, and this is 9 o'clock. this is a standard or a norm or a rule. You will be measured against this. So whether you're coming here before 9 a.m., you're coming at 9 a.m., or you're coming after 9 a.m. This is what is used to measure. Norms are used to measure. Standards are used to measure some behavior, some action, some individual, some object, okay, some state of affairs against a standard. Only then we can figure out whether that individual, that behavior, that action, that result, or an outcome or the object meets the standard, falls short of the standard, or exceeds the expectations. You got it? That is what norms or standards are for. Now, in this example, 9 o'clock, you were supposed to come at 9 o'clock every day. You're coming before time. So what would be the value? What would be this value that I would attach? I'll say this person is very... Okay, I'll give you a new word. Conscientious. Conscientious. Okay, CONSCIENTIOUS, which means this person is very organized, very dependable, very diligent, is self-disciplined, and adheres to the rules, respects the rules, follows the rules. Okay? How about this person? So therefore, what would be the value I'll attach? Excellent behavior, good. And if it is something of, let's say, in a moral context, I'll say morally excellent, morally good. Somebody who constantly turns out late, I'll say morally bad, morally evil, or morally wrong, or morally unacceptable, inappropriate, or morally unjust behavior. Unjust is not applicable here, but rest everything is applicable. Okay, so this is your norms. So now you know socialization is about internalization or internalizing your societies, your cultures, norms, values, beliefs, and representations. So there are some very good points of this socialization, and there are some very negative points of this. Okay, I can rub this off. While this long sentence seemed like full of acronyms, you note it down completely. You can use this acronym to easily store and retrieve from your memory as a memory gadget, as I call it. Friends, family, peers. Okay? Religion, education, art, literature, legal systems. Role models, media and entertainment, events, slogans, and then social, economic, and political structures, social, economic, and political goals, okay, social, economic, and political agendas and institutions. So this all becomes part of this pipeline. All right. Supposing there is a culture which has a lot of, let's say, negative norms that it follows, standards against which it measures. very negative, let's say negative traditions or practices or customs. Remember, at some point of time, we had let's say, let's see if you can see what it is. If you can spot, okay. Sati was a cultural tradition, practice, custom of a certain era. Socialization as a process will ensure that this gets passed on from one generation to another generation to another to another. Okay, that is how it was coming. So socialization by itself is not negative. It depends what is it trying to reproduce, replicate. What is it trying to reproduce, replicate, okay, pass on as a tradition, as a practice, as a custom? What is it trying to pass? So it is about, in one sense you can say, it is also about now just imagine if there are some truly wonderful, positive social traditions, practices, customs, values, beliefs, and cultural representations. Don't we want a continuity of it? Yes, we want a continuity. We want it to pass from generation to generation. Don't we want to reproduce, replicate? Don't we want people to adopt? A better word is internalize these things. We want it. Okay? Tradition. All right. So that is what socialization is all about. Now, I'll take this off. All your social ills, lot of social ills, casteism, okay, superstitions. Super means above. Station, to stand, to stand, to stand above logic, rationality, okay, good in that way. So superstitions, all kind of superstitions, social ills. I don't want to spend time talking about that. You can do a simple search for yourself. Use Google, anything that you want. Okay, to do this. Now, socialization is socialization, you can visualize it as a huge pipeline which delivers a couple of things. One is it delivers culture, continuity, reproduce, replicate, carrying on the tradition. So culture will flow through it. There is something called ideology. We will cover this in the next session. What is ideology? Okay, so socialization is this. Socialization is about, I'll complete this. It is about people, some good things, you can adopt it. It is about, socialization teaches us coexistence. Coexistence. Maybe I was right the first time. Okay. Human beings can coexist together. We could collaborate. We could compete. To compete without enmity or ill feelings. We can compete without enmity or ill feelings. We can collaborate. We can coexist. We can accommodate. We can share. Okay? We can follow norms. Always write this. Values, beliefs, and representations. Now look at this. The positive side of what it can do is, if we adopt it, we will learn how to coexist. Okay? Collaborate with each other. Teamwork. It builds up. Collaboration would need trust, faith in each other. Trust, faith in each other. Meeting expectations of each other. Expecting and meeting expectations of others, not disappointing somebody else, not grabbing whatever you want in life, competing but without enmity or ill will. Okay? Accommodate each other. Even if somebody is not able to keep the promise, can I accommodate to a certain extent? Okay, somebody is in trouble, family member is ill, can we still kind of collaborate, accommodate his or her requests? This is not very natural to human beings, which at the end of it are like animals in one way. We all have animal instinct. We want the best for us. We want to grab the best, the biggest share of, let's say, wealth, opportunities, okay, and all good things in life. So this teaches us sharing. Then is, and following all of this, then passing it to the next generation, continuing that tradition and practice, reproducing, replicating traditions, taking forward a particular ideology. Okay, so socialization is that complete process, which is continuous, lifelong, interactive process through which an individual internalizes his or her society's norms, values, beliefs, and representations. So what we'll do is, we will stop almost in the next 5 minutes. I think you had a lot to learn today. By the time you adopt, assimilate, perhaps internalize some lessons, it'll take you quite a while to assimilate, internalize, but internalize what seems sensible to you. So next time I'll be starting with types of socialization. So you can note it down. Types. Primary, secondary, re-socialization, and proactive socialization. Okay, types. We've already discussed the positives and negatives. Okay, negatives. One thing I would like to end this with would be, what are the negatives? You will observe that our society is like a ladder. Imagine that example from England. Can you imagine it like a social ladder? A social ladder, an economic ladder, and a political power and influence ladder. That means somebody at the top has the most of social status, economic status, and political influence, political power, has the most political representation. Okay, so is a beneficiary of high social status, economic opportunities, wealth, funding, all right, uh, beneficiary of various economic policies, schemes of, let's say, Government of India. Okay, access to political power, influence at the top, and below, let's say, the last man, somebody who doesn't have access to this. So people who are the biggest beneficiaries, do you think they'll allow others to climb the ladder like that? Did the wealthy landowners of old England and the industry people who owned those factories and mills gave even a extra penny to those workers, or that firewood from the commons? No. So what happens is, socialization and specifically ideology becomes very powerful instrument for people to lock in their place in this ladder. Everybody tries to lock, and so on. Okay, here you have nothing to lock. What will you lock? The only place, you can't go lower. You can't go lower than this. It's a miserable, pathetic, brutal existence. You only can go up, but there is no way you're going up. So everybody kind of locks up. I'll speak to you about this concept in a greater detail. So sometimes, not sometimes, many times, more often than not, socialization becomes that pipeline that ensures, along with ideology, that these states are locked in favor of people who are beneficiaries. That is why I gave you the example of the old England, okay? And that is why I'll talk to you about the US slave trade. All right, we will stop this lecture. This was the session number 6th. I definitely expect you to master all of this learnings of 6 sessions over the next 1 week. Give it sufficient thought. The value of this will emerge when you do not stop with what I have said. I have told you what is sufficient. I've told you pretty much, I've given you the complete picture, I've given you complete points in one sense. These are your notes. We went absolutely academically accurate with all our definitions, all the points. For example, we said culture, norms, values, beliefs, representations. Representations are mental images, symbols, language, expressions, and myths. Now you start thinking about all of these things, leading to assimilation, internalization. All right, see you next time.